And this one is the route to active streets is in the air. And we have some fantastic people who I will let Arthur introduce. But just to say that after this, we're going to have an all plenary panel as well, and then we're gonna break for lunch, just so that you know what's waiting for you. But hopefully we're in for a blockbuster of the rest of the day. So with that, I'm gonna hand you over to Arthur.
Good morning, and thank you all very much for being here. I'm hoping we're going to speak very loudly and clearly so we can get over the AC. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Arthur Kay, and I'm going to be moderating this session. And we've got some incredible panelists here that we'll be having a conversation with. The big thing that we want to do today is to try and make it as much as a conversation as possible, and to hear comments and questions from you guys as well, because there's a huge amount of knowledge in the room. So what we don't want to say is that we're the people who know everything and you're not. This is a conversation between all of us. Briefly, to give some context as to who I am, my name's Arthur. I'm a professor of practice at UCL Faculty for the Built Environment. I'm a board member of Transport for London, so either cheer me or boo me as you like, and also the author of a book called Roadkill: Unveiling the True Cost of Our Toxic Relationship with Cars, which is for sale in all good bookshops and downstairs in the lobby, I should say as well, so don't be shy. The session today is called The Route to Active Streets is in the Air. And we're going to try and take, as I said earlier, there's a huge amount of knowledge in the room already, so we're going to try and move beyond a lot of the existing evidence that I think a lot of people already know, and try and make this as much as possible about practical and tactical solutions for how we can change our cities. And we're very lucky to have a brilliant set of panelists here today who are doing just that. First off, we're going to be hearing kind of comments and questions in some short pieces first. But firstly, we got Jemima Hartshorn, founder of Mums for Lungs. Let's have a round of applause as we go. Then Cecilia Vacker-Jones is Executive Director of Breathe Cities. And finally, Maya Myler, who is co-director of Our Kids Climate. So I want to start with a question around, some of the themes we're going to go through today around the politics of our streets in terms of how we get to these places, around how we can make a voice for people who may be underrepresented, and I think children may be one of those groups that we touched on today, around power, influence and permission, and also around some of the backlash that people are facing, again, tying that to some of our politics as well. So maybe I can start with a question to the panelists around how do people who don't have formal power, that might be through positions of influence in their workplace, that might be through voting, that might be through other forms of power, so those people who don't have formal power, how can activism and how can your actions help give power to those people in the street?
Does it work like that? Yes, now you can hear me. I think when there is no formal power, activism is the main form of power, and it embodies loads of different things. It can be letters, it can be meeting a policymaker, it can be a demonstration, it is colourful posters, it is postcard campaigns, and it's, bringing many people together to hold politicians to account. Sometimes it is finding the opposition and making them hold the politicians to account if you align with them more strongly. So I think it's all these kind of things that we need to employ quite a lot in this field, in this topic around active travel, active streets and air pollution. And I think what really stood out for me when I started campaigning and started Mums for Lungs was actually what was raised on the panel so strongly before, that children have no agency. They cannot even determine where they live, they cannot determine how they travel, how their parents travel, and they don't have any kind of vote at the ballot either. So, what we have to do as parents is we have to do what we have to do.
So I work for Breathe Cities, which is an initiative where basically we're trying to decrease the air pollution across different cities in the world. And what we've realized by working very closely with cities is that as far as you want to implement good policy and programs, you need to bring the community into the way that you run the programs. So to your question of how you create that agency on the people is just make them be part of the solution, make them be and own the policies and the programs that you're testing in the cities. And I think there are many different ways that we do that. And you talked briefly about streets, and I see a lot of familiar faces here. Simon, Tim, I see Sky there, and I think this is also part of what we should be thinking about. Like, it's giving voices to those people who usually don't have a voice. So children, for sure, are those who need to be engaged into designing a street, into being part of like putting a little design or a little piece of art or a little piece of creative thinking on the way that we design the street. And there are many different methodologies that allows us to do that. But I think sometimes we also need to consider which are the voices on the different places that we can involve and engage while we're doing an intervention, while we're testing a policy, while we're testing a program. And I think that works differently in every context. But I'm positive that that's the best way to do good policy, because if you don't engage people into these programs, then probably policy is not going to be sustainable in the long term.
Can you hear me now? Yay! First hurdle overcome. I fully agree with what Jemima and Ceci have said. I work with Our Kids Climate, and we support parent groups in many different countries. And what we see is that parents, mothers, dads have influence through telling their stories and through their authenticity and being that trusted messenger that doesn't have a political agenda, that's speaking about their kids' health, that's having those conversations with their local councillors, with their MPs, on the while they're doing the school run, while they're watching their kid play football. And given all of the polarization and fragmentation, I just think people are crying out to hear that authentic story. And there's nothing, I think, stronger than parents coming together. And I'll just give you a very real-world example. We know it's very hot. My children's school has closed. It's, I think, 32 degrees, they said, in my kids' classroom at 9:30 a.m. and 50% humidity. That's happening across the country, so kids aren't outside, they're not being active, they're at home watching TV, eating crisps, in the case of my children. But parents are banding together, so I've heard already on the WhatsApp group I'm on of parents coming together to pay for an air conditioning unit for their school, to talk to the headmaster, talk to the local councillor about how to make their schools safe for learning again. So it's happening in real time in response to the climate crisis and the health crisis that we're all feeling. People are acting because they know they can't wait. We can't wait for the politicians to act. We've got to take power into our own hands.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I
please.
just say one thing? Because we always talk about needing to take the whole community with us, but actually that's deeply unfair, because we are all paying for the tax that is needed to be raised for potholes. We're all paying for the NHS that has loads of children in hospital because of air pollution. We never need to consult if neighbours buy car 2, 3 and 4 and park it on the road. But if we need a bike hanger, that is costly and needs to be consulted on. And I also think there is very few other political realms where the state has so much power and would require much less consultation. So I don't get consulted on, of course not, on issues of how to reorganize the NHS. I wouldn't have good things to say, whether my GP should do certain things or not. But when it comes to the public realm, when it comes to our streets, when it comes to the children and their health, that suddenly is a matter that needs everyone's view, whether they have information or not. And that is really, really deeply unfair, and I think actually wrong.
And this idea about kind of how much of this is structural in terms of the framing of how our system works, and around the idea of kind of, the car industrial complex, or the fact that we've become car blind to a lot of the infrastructure that we're around day to day without drawing that to account. I completely agree with. I think to kind of pick up, each of you mentioned around how your work is by the sound of it, a lot of ground up and grassroots work, but also at the same time looking to partner with, influence, provide insight to formal power structures. That might be in the form of local councillors and politicians. It might be in the form of large transport bureaucracies like TfL or equivalents in other cities. So perhaps if we could talk tactically a little bit. What ideas have you found successful or cut through to give, I'm going to use the word bravery, to politicians, because often, or decision makers with formal power, because often they may, in the privacy of a room or indeed in conferences such as this, want talk to that, but to turn that into practical delivered policy and make some of those structural changes that you're touching on is much more challenging. So could we talk to ideally with some examples of the change you've made as well, how you've gone about that? Or maybe we start at this end.
Yeah, and so I can give some examples maybe from outside the UK, because a lot of the work that I'm doing is global. And I think what unites this example is talking to politicians and fellow parents in kind of very common sense, accessible language, and probably not using the word climate change or mobility. So I'll give you a great example. New York Climate Families, a group that we work with in New York. Obviously, the politics across the US are not very conducive to this agenda right now, but they've been running a campaign for several months to get balcony solar and plug-in solar onto high-rise buildings. And this is potentially going to be a game changer that will allow ordinary families to reduce their energy bills, which are only going to get higher because of the need to cool our buildings and so on, through plug-in solar. But there were some obstacles around permitting, and they worked with a whole coalition of community groups and parent groups and got this legislation through at the state level. And I think Ceci sees this all the time, that it's at the city and the state level that we're really seeing that change, even when at the national level the politics is outright hostile to what we're trying to do. And there's many other examples, but I'll hand over to the other panelists.
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna talk about 3 examples, and one of them is Bogota. So Bogota has done like their own kind of low emission zone, which is called SUMA. And they're working in one of the most vulnerable areas of the city. So this is a program from the city. And of course, one of the main goals there is to reduce air pollution, but one of the main targets there is to actually improve the quality of air in order to improve the health of young children, because a lot of the young children in that area are suffering of many respiratory illnesses. And I think what has been really key there is, and one of the things that we're doing across all of the BREATHE cities, is we have low-cost monitoring sensors that allow people to have good data on the air quality. And with this, I think that bridging the divide that you might have with the city and just working with the city in order to have these complementary networks of air quality is what we really see is working across all the different cities. It's working in London, but it's also working in a city like Bogota. It's working in Nairobi. It's working in Johannesburg. But it's also being adapted in many different ways. So in the case of Bogota, it's being adapted in a very vulnerable community that is working with a very specific early childhood center, trying to deal and work with the parents of the daycare center, but also with the grandparents of the daycare center, who are usually the ones that are also going to be mostly affected by air quality. So the whole intervention becomes the city intervention that's supported by the people. So I'm going back to my first argument as well. I also want to talk about the case of Nairobi. So again, the case of Nairobi, what we're working really hard is on having community leaders learn about air quality data. And in the case of Nairobi, we work in a lot of slums. And what has been super powerful is that, again, you have a lot of advocates that are women. And for me, what's always beautiful is that when it comes to women advocating for air quality, what brings them together is usually health of their family and especially their young children. And when they understand that the effects that air quality is having in the well-being of their babies and children, they naturally become advocates for the cause. But they also want to be part of the solution. And I think this is super important. It's not always blaming the city for this is what should have been done. It's also like, what can we do to support what you're doing? And the third example is one other example that I really love is, and it's probably not just across children, but I think that's how you work with the whole ecosystem, right? For me, it's not just working, with community engagement or cities or academia or data, is we need to work with the whole ecosystem if we want to have impact at scale. And in the case of Johannesburg, we work with an organization that's called Urban Betters. And what they do is, again, they monitor the quality of air while running or cycling. And what's really special about this is that they usually work with young leaders, but many of them are actually parents. So that's also really good because they start understanding how air quality is affecting their own health while running. But also when they get that at a personal level, they understand how this is affecting the rest of their family. I think that what I love about this project is the fact that they really do this themselves. So it becomes something, it's like an advocacy that takes a concrete action on understanding, oh, this is the air I'm breathing, and I can start seeing which are the streets that are less polluted. Where can I breathe better air? Why am I living here? And many times you don't have the option, but you do have the option to make different choices to improve your behavior, so you can basically be less exposed to air pollution, but also to improve your position as a citizen towards understanding the problem.
I don't really have a lot to add, but I think the point I would like to make is that we still need data. Last year in March, Gary Fuller said there had been about 60,000 studies linking air pollution to negative health outcomes. So that clearly didn't make the UK adopt WHO recommendations. So clearly we need more things, and this is where the data still comes in. So what we do with Mums for Lungs is we do some, we're a very small team, so it's limited what we can do on research, but what we do is FOI research, and some of the FOI research that has helped support school streets being delivered across the country has been that we could show that they break even if they are delivered via an ANPR camera within about a year, and that we could give local authorities and MPs very specific data on how many children had been hospitalized with breathing issues in their locality. That's research we do every year, and I'm a bit cynical. We shouldn't need this kind of detail on data, but clearly we do need it. And I think, especially in the kind of detail where you do stuff around monitoring and school streets, that's actually genuinely really interesting, because we do need to make a case in times of questions about funding that the thing we're doing is really worth it, that it is financially feasible, and that it has a huge impact.
Brilliant, thank you. We have about 15 minutes left, so I hope that I want to see a bunch of twitching hands ready for your short and concise questions so that we can give to the panelists. I want to bring this a bit to some of the I guess, challenges and backlash that some of these things have. And I think we have a room here full of people who, I'm guessing, agree with a lot of what you're hearing on stage, that we need better evidence, we need to deliver stories, we need to tell those stories, we need to find community leaders, and those sorts of things. All over the world. However, there is a huge backlash to this, and that's not because people are mad, bad, up to no good, scheming, all the rest of it. That's usually because they're telling a different story. A lot of the research we did for our book Roadkill was around that. These stories are around things like freedom, stories around what freedoms means to different groups and why, and some of the challenges around that. And these are often very, very deeply held beliefs that are, even if you bring phenomenally good data of what's happening to their children, or indeed, unborn fetuses and all sorts of shocking things that are happening throughout the world, you can bring that data, and the story is so deep that may or may not work within that. So I wanted, and we're seeing that even in a city like London, the difference between inner London boroughs and outer London boroughs, you see very different reactions and opinions about things, some of the solutions that we may be talking about. So if we take that as true, that you can bring brilliant data, but that doesn't work, how can we think about telling better stories that kind of try and change those hearts and minds of people who may tie their sense of freedom, their sense of independence to what they see as economic prosperity, what they say is living the good life, what they see as their right to the road, etc. So as a challenge, as my last question before we move to the floor.
I can start. I think that stories need to be more human, and I have done a lot of work on early childhood development. I see Patrin back there, who's one of my ex-colleagues. And we realize that sometimes, for example, bringing babies when we are talking about air quality it's something that's very powerful because in a way or another, we all care about babies. It's almost, they're probably the most vulnerable. Like a baby cannot just like many times raise their voice of like, I don't want to breathe this air. And basically just if you think the first thing we do when we get to this earth is we breathe. And if from day one you're exposed to bad air quality, then this limits your possibilities of having a good development. So I think that sometimes bringing this, and I think in London, like we always go back to the case of Ella, which is very powerful. But I think, again, many times, and for me, working in many different cities across the world makes me realize is that you need to have these human stories that also adapt to your own culture, to your own reality. In some places is also making visible some of these things affecting the most vulnerable populations. I was talking this morning to somebody from Amnesty International, and we were talking about Rio de Janeiro, which again is in the position of the slums in Rio are mostly affected by air quality because they're in the middle of the most congested roads. And we were talking how, the people in the slums, they don't even use cars. Like they actually the slums are walkable. you don't even have the circulation of cars. Nevertheless, all of the air pollution of the city and the industries and the city and everything, it's affecting directly the slums. So, in this case, it's not even them changing any behaviors because they're not responsible for the cause of what's creating this problem. So I guess that then for me is like, how can we find these good stories? And she was referring to a lot of black women living in these favelas and really kind of like giving them the voices, but also the data and just backing these stories, but not just from an advocacy perspective, because I also want to make sure that I deal with this topic. Sometimes we're expecting people to just continue being activists and advocates, but these people also need to take food to their families. So for me, it's also how can we find ways that this also becomes part of a movement that creates new green jobs, that creates new possibilities and opportunities for these people to stand up doing this, but also doing this as a work, not just as an activation of advocating for this cause.
Feedback. I totally agree on the need for authentic, human, heartfelt stories, and I think that's very well understood, and there's a lot of work being done in that area. But I did want to bring in another point, Arthur, because this backlash isn't happening by accident. This backlash is also being engineered by political forces who are weaponizing the conversation around the climate crisis, who are weaponizing the conversation around cars. And I think we really do need to have an honest and courageous conversation about that. Reform UK is funded about 2/3 by the oil and gas industry, and our politics are being corrupted in the UK and in many other countries by an industry that is trying to block progress. And they are taking people's very real concerns about the cost of living, about social services, and they're weaponizing it. And we need to also reckon with that, because it's not just about the authentic stories, it's also about understanding where the politics is and where the money is. And knowing that, as parents and as community organizers, we can tell another story, but we need to have that honesty about some of the politics at play.
Super. So we heard there a little bit about both the need for human stories, the need to make the people who may be disenfranchised or suffering some of the challenges part of the economic prosperity that could come from this in terms of jobs and being part of the solution of that, and then also to what extent is some of this manufactured or engineered in terms of some of the interest groups at stake here. Can we get we got 10 minutes. Can we get a show of hands in terms of some questions? We'll try and take a couple at a time to go. So if we have here and then to you there. And if we can make the questions relatively concise, that'd be brilliant.
Hi, thank you all so much. My name is Kayla Schulte. I'm a researcher at Imperial, and I deliver the Breathe London Community Program. My question's actually for you, Arthur, and bringing it back to your points about power. So I work directly with communities who are kind of at times feel at odds with their built environment, and there are a lot of different intersecting, governance, bureaucracies, structures, et cetera. And I guess in instances where it feels like decisions are being kind of made for them specifically around, like, I'm talking more like red routes, highways, things that like maybe can't be moved. I'm curious to hear your experience. I'm curious to hear the experiences of others where, at least in the short term, like, we're not going to be able to bury a highway. How do you have those conversations with the people that you work with, and how do you, like, because I struggle, like, I want to empower them, but I also, like, I feel badly because I know, like, we're not going to be able to bury this highway right now. So how do we kind of keep that going?
Brilliant question. Thank you. Let's take another question here at the same time. We'll take two or three at a go. And then afterwards.
Thank you. So I'm Mary. I work for an organisation called Trees for Cities. So I think I just wanted to kind of bring trees and green infrastructure into the conversation, really, in terms of holistic solutions, because ultimately, if you want to improve air pollution, obviously, we need to remove the pollution source, and we're very clear on that. But there is also a role to be played, I think, for tree planting and ways of engaging the community with air pollution and ways to improve it. So we were involved last year in creating a report in partnership with Tower Hamlets Council and with a researcher, Dr. James Levine from the University of Birmingham, which is called GI4AQ, so it's Green Infrastructure for Air Quality, and it involved developing like a piece of open source software that can be used by designers to model the impact of their greening on their air quality at the roadside. And then looking at practical interventions that we can do on the street. And, if we put in trees here, if we put a hedge in here, how's that going to impact what people are breathing right here? We do a lot of work in schools and looking at school playgrounds as well, and how we can improve the quality of the air children are breathing in the spaces that they have to be. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring that into the conversation and think about how the role of trees in this conversation.
Brilliant. Why don't we start with, and also feel free also to comment on the question here as well, but why don't we start with a quick responses to the brilliant work for Trees for Cities, and then I'll come back to you as well.
I'll just say something because I was with Ana Hidalgo yesterday, and she's one of my favorite mayors on one of the Breathe cities as well, which is Paris. And, when there's the political will to dare to do those changes, I do think that some of those changes are possible. Like in Paris, nobody thought that the avenue that was across the Seine could ever be a pedestrian avenue. But then it takes probably a woman with strong political will to wanting to do the things, and also to have all the technical support that you need in order to then bring the right streets into the city, where you have safe bike lanes, where you have greenery, where you have access to blue infrastructure, where you have play along the way, where you bring the streets back to people. So I do believe that when you start thinking, and coming from I'm working for air quality, and many times the entry point is not going to be air quality. For me, the entry point should be, let's bring streets back to people.
Kayla, for yeah, that was great. Thank you. Kayla, so for London, I would like to do nod to the ULEZ that has had a massive impact on reducing air pollution on the main roads. When we started campaigning at Mums for Lungs, which is 9 years ago, the annual legal average on nitrogen dioxide on Brixton Road was 108. It is now, I think, Rosina is nodding, 46? Exactly. So on the very high breaches, it's gone from 800 breaches a year to 0 high breaches. So I think what that means is that progress is possible, and progress is possible in places like London. And we now need to see how, and need to figure out how we can turn the tide, which has been, difficult recently for all the reasons that Maya mentioned, into a huge progressive force, at least across London. And I think there are some great opportunities. But we do know that there are schemes that work. We also are incredibly lucky to know in London what the biggest contributors to air pollution are. It's diesel vans. They need to come off the roads. It's diesel cars. We're waiting for a judgment. You're all invited to protest with us when the judgment comes. I'll let you know. The next steps are clear, and I think that is what I would do. Everyone in the Breathe London network would be invited to join the protest to make sure that London becomes cleaner, that the Mayor of London takes us back onto his topic, because we know what works, and that is getting the dirtiest cars off our roads.
We'll be with you, Jemima. Yes. I just want to furiously agree that we love trees. I still remember planting trees as a kid. And I think it's not just that it cleans the air, it allows children to connect with nature, and that has like a lasting legacy. And I just wanted to bring in one other perspective. So my collaborator from India, she's not here, but she's here in London Climate Week. Her big battle is stopping the trees from being cut down in the first place because of the road building. So it's also protecting those old trees. But yes, more trees, please.
Brilliant, thank you. Just to respond very briefly to this point, who here's read The Power Broker, Robert Caro's great book about Robert Moses? A few hands here. So this is about a person who wielded vast political power for both great good and for great ill. And one of the things he's on the record having said is, existing laws can be changed. It's very hard to tear down a bridge. And so to your point around the infrastructure done, I think this does also reveal a dark side of some of this stuff that we agree that doing things that, enlightened people in this room should be doing to places with some level of consultation, or more or less, can be brilliant. But it is exercising power on people who may or may not, to differ, even if we think it's going to be brilliant for their kids or for them or all the rest of it, there is a tension there. And I think we would be wrong or missing something if we didn't acknowledge that tension. So thank you very much for bringing that up in terms of where things being done to communities, even if there is an active group within those communities who are vocal for it. We are out of time. Do we have time for one word? We're out of time. Guys, thank you very much for your time and attention, and a huge round of applause to our brilliant panel.